It started a few months ago when I moved into my new apartment, a small place at the edge of town. It was affordable, quiet, and seemed perfect for someone like me who preferred solitude. The previous tenants left without much notice, and the landlord seemed eager to fill the vacancy. I didn't think too much about it. I wish I had. The first night I slept there, I woke up at 3 a.m., feeling like someone was watching me. The room was cold, despite it being summer, but I brushed it off as nerves from being in a new place. That was until I saw her. At the foot of my bed, a woman stood, motionless, staring right at me. Her pale face, gaunt and expressionless, almost blended with the darkness. She looked as real as anyone I'd ever seen, not like a ghost, but as if a stranger had somehow wandered into my apartment. Frozen, I tried to speak, but no sound left my throat. I couldn't move. My heart pounded against my chest as I stared at her, expecting her to say something, move, or disappear. But she didn't. She just stood there, her eyes locked on mine, her mouth slightly open as if about to speak, but never did. I blinked, and in that instant, she was gone. Just like that. I spent the rest of the night wide awake, the silence of the apartment crushing down on me. I tried convincing myself it was a trick of my mind, a remnant of a half-forgotten dream. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. That woman, she had been real, or at least she had felt real. The next few nights were quiet. I didn't see her again, though I started noticing strange things. The floorboards would creak as if someone was walking in the next room, but every time I checked, the apartment was empty. Objects would move, small things like my keys or a glass of water, but I dismissed it as my own forgetfulness. Until the night it happened again. It was late, and I was watching TV when I felt that same suffocating sensation. I turned around, and this time it wasn't just her. There were two of them, a man and a woman standing side by side in my living room. They were solid, like flesh and blood people, dressed in outdated clothes that looked like they were from decades ago. But their faces, emotionless, eyes void of any life, mouths open like they were silently screaming. I shot up from the couch, my body trembling, every instinct screaming for me to run. But where could I go? This was my home. I was paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of them. The man, taller than the woman, took a step forward, his movements unnaturally slow and deliberate. He raised his hand, pointing at me, and though his lips never moved, I swear I heard him say, "You shouldn't be here." Then, like before, they vanished. The next day, I called the landlord, asking about the previous tenants. He hesitated before telling me that no one had lived in that apartment for years, not since the couple who had owned it disappeared. Vanished without a trace. I should have moved out then. I should have packed my bags and never looked back. But I couldn't. Something about the apartment felt like it was pulling me in, like it wanted me to stay. Now every night they come. Sometimes just the woman, sometimes both of them. They never speak, never touch me, but their presence is overwhelming. I can feel their cold breath on my neck when they're near. They watch me with those empty eyes, as if waiting for something. It was supposed to be a peaceful winter getaway. I had rented a small Airbnb cabin deep in the woods, far from the noise and chaos of the city. The listing boasted of complete isolation, with no neighbors for miles, perfect for unwinding during the holiday season. The snow had begun to fall heavily just as I arrived, creating a picturesque scene. Felt like stepping into a snow globe. The host had left a message on the kitchen table, welcoming me and reminding me to keep the fireplace going since the temperature could drop well below freezing at night. There was no cell reception out here, but that didn't bother me. I was here to unplug after all. The first night was peaceful. The snow fell steadily outside, piling up against the windows as I curled up by the fire with a book. The silence was thick, almost tangible, broken only by the crackling of the logs in the fireplace and the occasional gust of wind that howled through the trees. Everything seemed perfect. It was the second night when things started to feel off. I was outside, collecting some firewood from the shed, when I saw it. Footprints. Fresh ones, leading from the edge of the woods toward the cabin, then stopping just outside the front door. There was no sign of anyone around, and the snow continued to fall lightly, slowly filling them in. My pulse quickened. I hadn't seen anyone when I drove in, and I was sure I was the only person here for miles. I looked around, scanning the tree line, but there was no one. It was like the person had appeared from nowhere and then vanished. Shaking it off, I went inside, bolted the door, and reassured myself that it was probably some hiker who had passed through before the snow got heavy. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The wind had picked up, rattling the windows, and the cabin creaked like an old ship swaying at sea. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a loud thump. Came from the living room. My heart leapt into my throat. I lay still, listening. The fire was still burning low, casting shadows that danced across the walls, but nothing seemed out of place. I told myself it must have been the wind knocking something over. But when I went to check, everything was where I had left it. The only thing out of place was the front door. It was wide open, snow blowing in and coating the floor. Panic surged through me. I was certain I had locked it. I slammed it shut, locking it again, and went back to bed, trying to calm my racing thoughts. But sleep wouldn't come. Every sound in the cabin seemed amplified in the quiet night. The crackling of the fire, the groaning of the wood, the soft whistle of wind, until, beneath it all, I thought I heard something else. A soft, almost imperceptible shuffling. Like footsteps, I lay perfectly still, my ears straining to catch the sound. There it was again, closer this time. Slowly, I lifted my head and looked toward the bedroom door. My breath caught in my throat. Standing in the doorway was a figure. A man, tall and gaunt, his face obscured by shadows. He was completely still, watching me. I froze, paralyzed by fear. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just stood there, silent, his dark silhouette looming in the doorway. I blinked, and in that instant he was gone. The doorway was empty, as if he had never been there at all. But I knew what I had seen. Terrified, I grabbed my coat and fled the cabin, not caring about the freezing cold or the deep snow that reached my knees as I ran. I didn't stop until I reached my car. I turned the ignition, desperate to leave, but the tires spun uselessly in the deep snow. I was trapped. I sat there for hours, trembling, waiting for morning. When the first light of dawn finally crept over the horizon, I ventured back inside to gather my things. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as I could. But when I opened the front door, something stopped me cold. More footprints, fresh ones, leading from the woods to the cabin, just like before. Only this time there were two sets. One led to the door, and the other led away, disappearing into the dense forest. I never saw anyone, and I didn't stick around to find out who, or what, had been watching me that night. I left without looking back, driving through the snow until I reached the nearest town. When I told the Airbnb host what had happened, she was quiet for a moment before she spoke. "That cabin's been empty for years," she said. "No one's lived there since the last renter went missing." During a snowstorm, I didn't respond. I just hung up and drove. I'm still trying to forget those footprints. But somehow, I know that no matter where I go, I'll never shake the feeling that something was out there, watching me. Something that didn't want me to leave. It was late, later than I had planned to be out. The long drive back home stretched ahead of me, with nothing but empty roads and darkness surrounding the car. The kind of night where even the stars seemed dim, the moon hidden behind thick clouds. I had taken this route before, a back road cutting through thick forests, but tonight, the road felt different. Eerily quiet, almost too quiet. The hum of the car's engine was the only sound as I sped down the narrow, winding road. The trees on either side closed in like a tunnel, their bare branches clawing at the sky. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that I wasn't alone out there, even though I hadn't seen another car for miles. It was just after midnight when the headlights of my car illuminated something up ahead. A figure walking along the side of the road, slowly, their head down. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't seen anyone for hours, and this road wasn't exactly a place for pedestrians, especially not at this time of night. I slowed the car as I approached, wondering if they needed help. As I got closer, I could make out more details. It was a woman, her long hair hanging in loose, messy strands, her clothes old-fashioned, almost like something from another era. She didn't look up as my car approached, didn't wave for help or even acknowledge my presence. She just kept walking. Something about her made my skin crawl. Maybe it was how she moved, slowly, stiffly, or the fact that she was out here, in the middle of nowhere on a freezing night. But as strange as it was, I didn't want to just leave her there. I slowed the car to a near stop, rolling down the window slightly. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need a ride?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness of the night. She didn't respond. She didn't even look at me. She just kept walking, as if she hadn't heard me at all. Something in my gut told me to drive away, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over a few feet ahead of her, intending to try again. But as I put the car in park and turned my head to check her position, she was gone. Just gone. The road was empty, and there was no sign of her. A cold chill ran down my spine. There were no turnoffs, no place for her to have disappeared to that quickly. The road was surrounded by dense woods, but even if she had somehow slipped into the trees, I would have seen some movement, heard something. But there was nothing, just silence. My heart pounded in my chest as I scanned the area, trying to make sense of what I had just seen, or rather, hadn't seen. She couldn't have just vanished. I was about to drive away when something caught my eye. In the rearview mirror, she was there, standing in the middle of the road, directly behind my car, staring at me. Her face was pale, almost glowing in the dim light from my taillights, and her eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. Panic surged through me. I threw the car into drive and slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched, the engine roared, and I sped off into the night, my heart racing. I didn't dare look back. For miles, I drove faster than I ever had before, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. The road ahead was a blur, and the trees rushed past in dark, indistinct shapes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, somewhere, just out of sight. It wasn't until I reached the outskirts of town, the distant glow of streetlights coming into view, that I finally started to calm down. The familiar sights of civilization felt like a safety blanket, and the sense of unease that had clung to me during the drive began to fade. I slowed the car, trying to catch my breath and steady my shaking hands. But then, as I turned onto my street and pulled into my driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. She was sitting in the back seat, silent, staring.